Hey guys, Dov here, back with another unit highlight. Today we're taking a look at the Swordmasters of Hoeth, a unit that is very interesting. I was potentially going to put it in the category of totally useless. No, I'm just kidding. They are actually decent, and I do think they're a little bit underrated, including by myself. They do have some issues though. Let's talk about their upsides quickly as we take a look at this army here. It's going to be High Elves versus Vampire Counts. My patron, Rider Rohan, commanding the High Elves here today up against these Vampire Counts, and we've got a Kemmler horse build, 2 White Kings on foot here with some Graveguard, including the Sternsmen, whole bunch of zombies, and a lot of cavalry going full on Bone Tonia today. The Vampire Counts, Varix Reavers over here, some Blood Knights. We've got more cavalry over on the other side as well. Regular Black Knights here, 3 of them, so 6 heavy cavalry is quite a bit. For the High Elves here, he's got 3 Rangers up front, a couple of Spearmen to the flanks, some Lothern Sea Guard, the Swordmasters of Hoeth in the center, Ilaria leading the way with the Fireborn, and the Lion Chariots, some Silverin Guard over there as well. So here in the front line, Swordmasters are going to move in. Now, I could have gotten a pretty good engagement here on these Sternsmen, but instead, Rider Rohan's going to use them to attack these White Kings here. And now, as we've seen recently, Great Swords can be actually a decent pick right now and have 1 or 2, specifically to take on foot characters, because foot characters are actually pretty good right now, especially like cheap combat characters like these White Kings. You know, you might see like a Wild Gotrek and Felix, potentially, Grimgor. There are quite a few foot characters who are decently viable now, or you may see on occasion. And taking a unit or 2 of Great Sword Infantry, you know, something with specifically armor-piercing anti-infantry that can kind of just blob around them and grind them down, can be pretty strong. The Lions sweep out over here, though, to take out the Tithe, keep them back from this big cav engagement. Giant pitch cav engagement here. The Silverin Guard are supporting, though. Great job by Rider Rohan to keep those Silverin Guard in a supporting position. You can see the vampires summon some zombies here, but this is going to be an interesting kind of shock cavalry grind fight, and there's a specific reason for that. Neither of these cavalry are really fast enough to pull away from the other. I mean, I guess the Fireborn could maybe pull away from this at 78 speed, but they take a lot of damage in the process, so it's a weird situation where the Vampire Counts honestly probably should pull back here, as there's a unit of Spear Infantry, Silverin Guard in particular, getting this nice heal with their extra anti-large damage. Now Rider Rohan also sweeping over with the Lion Chariots, and this is something you guys have seen on the channel a bit recently, is using these armor-piercing chariots in an anti-large role. They're going to come in here and provide some additional punch. Meanwhile, over here, the Black Knights are breaking up this flank, but you know, Rider Rohan's again doing a great job sort of managing the losses here. You can see that these Rangers ended up taking a lot of damage in this fight, but Swordmasters, the subject of this video, just the one unit here is fighting with these Rangers, and both of these White Kings are taking a lot of damage here, specifically from the Swordmasters. So that's pretty nice. These White Kings otherwise would be providing extra leadership. Not that that really matters too much, but could help prevent some crumbling damage. And likewise, yeah, just that getting rid of that extra anti-infantry splash power. White Kings are decent cost-effective characters on foot. Only 500 points for them, so definitely worthwhile to take. Almost like a single entity Graveguard, basically, but cheaper. You can see these Black Knights are having a hard time, though. Everything here basically has spears except for the Rangers and the Swordmasters. Definitely these cavalry probably should be hitting those Swordmasters, but there's also these extra spearmen kind of protecting there. We take a look out over here, you can see the Lion Chariots actually come out, disengage. One of them actually, maybe not disengaging, but the other 2 will come back around. I don't know if it'll actually proc their charge bonus. It looks like maybe they will get their charge. It's hard to say. But regardless, the Fireborn here, the Dovahkiin Elves, have been just absolutely grinding out the fight. Krell does get summoned here, and he's going to come in and try and deliver a Righteous Strike to Ilariel, but she's got good enough melee defense, 67 melee defense. She managed to not get hit there, and she does pull away. She's not the Fanchantress, so she doesn't have to stay in combat to get benefit. And now Krell will start pummeling. Oh, maybe start pummeling. Looks like he actually just faded. Probably did pummel quite a few of those Fireborn there. And the Lion Chariot's also sort of starting to get worn down, but these Blood Knights have been having a hard time. I will say this Vampire build does lack corpse cart support. Definitely some corpse carts on this flank could have swung this, or even some skeleton spears potentially to help take out those Silverin Guard. Tumbler does have his sword, which is sort of acting as a constant AoE invocation of Nehek, as well as his own, of course, invocation of Nehek. But it just hasn't been enough to sustain this engagement because the Fireborn actually have better sustained combat stats than the Blood Knights. Especially while that martial prowess was active, they were able to win out. And again, the spear support. Look at these Silverin Guard, basically untouched here. 2 XP chevrons, 150 kills. They're definitely MVPs in this engagement, which is why I'd say the Vampire player maybe should have pulled away there. But checking back with the Swordmasters, you can see there's lots of dead Graveguard here. They are now finishing off that Graveguard, raising their swords in victory, up to 65 kills and an XP chevron. Most of that is from taking out those 2 White Kings. I mean, that in and of itself just about paid for themselves. Then they come in and clean up some of those Graveguard as well. A few of the Sternsmen, I didn't unfortunately highlight that. Wanted to talk about the Cav engagement a bit, but yeah, decent play for the Swordmasters. It's a unit that's tricky to use, and I'll talk more about why in just a minute. But here, utilizing it to take out the foot characters is pretty strong. And this is one matchup where you can kind of expect potentially Banshees, maybe. Although Alariel's AoE magic damage, you've got Fleming's Sword of Ruin, other ways to get magic damage on these guys to be able to kill Banshees. White Kings are quite common these days, or even a Necromancer on foot just with the Forbidden Rod for extra winds of magic. I mean, of course, they'll kill a corpse card as well, but yeah, the White Kings are a pretty common pick in most Vampire Counts builds right now, and you may even run into a wild like Vlad pick or something, so that's decent here. Against something like... Yeah, let's just dive right into it. 113 for the Fireborn, great job. Silverin Guard as well, highlighted them. Lion Chariots, love the usage of that. Great job by Ryder Rohan, man. Super great replay. Yeah, just talking a little bit more about Swordmasters. They are tricky to use, I will say. That's one of the reasons they're underrated, is because often newer players will take them and get kind of crumped because they rely on them too much. You have to understand that this is a unit that's... It might seem tanky in some aspects, but in fact, it's really not in terms of its HP. We can look at some other comparable greatsword units. But for 1250, it is pretty expensive for what you're getting. Only 900 points, and you can see that the greatswords actually have more armor and more HP. They do have significantly less melee defense, and of course with martial prowess, that's even bigger of a difference. But that HP, especially HP per model, is important. And now granted, High Elves do have a lower model count, so I need to math it out. Maybe they do actually have slightly more HP per model, but still 500 less HP overall is significant. And keep in mind that they don't have physical resistance like, say, Phoenix Guard do, which is a reason that they end up being a lot tankier, even though well, they do have more armor as well. But yeah, that physical resistance, 30%, is very significant. So Phoenix Guard ended up, in practice, being a lot tankier than Swordmasters. Swordmasters, their melee defense is good, but things with like 60+ charge bonus, if they get hit in the face by that charge, they're going to lose out pretty quickly. They'll very quickly take a lot of damage, and this is true of anything that can do a lot of shock damage, whether that be chariots, monsters, even different types of magic, obviously certain types of cav as well. If they get hit hard, they lose that martial prowess. It's bad news for them. They're going to trade a lot less efficiently, and a lot of that comes down to, I mean, their melee defense is pretty good, but it's still not amazing. If we compare to their Dark Elf counterparts, personally, I think Murderous Prowess is just far and away better than martial prowess, because rather than losing it at a critical time in the battle, you actually get it at a critical time in the battle. And not only that, but these guys have Murderous Mastery, which is an even better version. Yeah, Swordmasters, slightly better stats, and again, with that martial prowess, it's even more to start, but they have less weapon strength, which is very important for a great weapon unit. Their anti-infantry bonus, let's see, plus 14, I would imagine it's the same here. Yeah, plus 14. Just more weapon damage overall for the Executioners, and they're 50 points cheaper. Now, you don't have healing for them, yes, but just because of that higher weapon damage and the cheaperness, yes, that's a word. Like in practice, they and of course the murderous mastery versus martial prowess, these guys end up being a lot more cost effective. And that's one of the reasons why Swordmasters of Hoeth, I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great unit, but they are a little expensive for what you get, why you have to use them sparingly. Now, yeah, that being said, some different use cases, as I mentioned, to take out foot heroes. And this is actually a matchup, Dark Elves, where you could potentially see a foot hero blob. You know, Marathi, Master, either K-Knight Assassin, or maybe, you know, whatever else. You do a Death Hag, depending on what you want for your Death Blob. You know, Doom Blob, whatever the Dark Elves would call it. Something to that effect, I'm sure. But yeah, in this matchup, potentially to take out foot characters, that would be pretty viable. Beastmen as well is an interesting one. Unfortunately, you don't have a way to give units just fire damage only, without also giving magic as high elves. You don't have Banner of Eternal Flame, and I don't remember any of these guys having any abilities that imbues fire damage that's castable. So, unfortunately, you can't get a direct bonus there, but even still, I mean, with their anti-infantry damage and good melee attack, they might be able to deal with Morgr. Now, that being said, Beastmen are a faction that can do a lot of shock damage and hit you very fast and hard, so Swordmasters could be a risky play against, you know, all of the cheap armor-piercing units that they have, and that's kind of the problem here. It's same thing with Bretonnia, like Shock Cavalry will run them over. Yeah, Dark Elves potentially is a decently viable one. It does bear mentioning, Swordmasters of Hoeth do have a small missile block chance. It's 20%, which is, it's there, it's not amazing, and you really shouldn't be relying on it. Like, you still don't want these guys taking direct, especially armor-piercing missile fire, but it'll help against the, like, incidental, especially non-AP type stuff. That's not going to do as much damage anyway, just help deflect a little bit extra of that, preserve that low HP pool. It's something to be aware of, but it's not something you want to rely on, certainly. Yeah, obviously Dwarfs is a pretty obvious one. Swordmasters, if you can keep them from getting completely blasted by Dwarven guns, then they will obviously be very good here. Empire is, I really think Swordmasters are overkill against Empire. Like, White Lions even trade pretty cost-effectively with Greatswords at their base. Obviously, Greatswords will likely have some buffs, but, I mean, the White Lions will also beat all the state troops, as will Rangers, so you really don't need Swordmasters in this matchup. If you're worried about potentially a Gotrek and Felix, I guess, I don't know. They're not as common of a pick for Empire as they say are for Bretonnia or the Dwarfs. Greenskins is one. Skarsnik, actually, you could argue, or Grimgor, like we saw before with the Greatswords, might be a reason to take it here. But again, Greenskins, very fast, a lot of heavy shock damage, a lot of cheap armor-piercing units, so it makes it tough there. Lizardmen, again, same thing. Like, White Lions trade cost-effectively against most of their infantry. Swordmasters will wreck Temple Guards, but sound like a broken record, but lots of cheap AP everywhere, so they just have a hard time there. And this is sort of the classic expensive infantry problem, is that a lot of things in this game are great, like Mammoths or Famir, at killing armored infantry, especially non-anti-large armored infantry, but just all infantry in general have a bit of a problem when it comes to, like, chariots, monsters, ranged attacks, you know, magic. All these things do a lot of damage to them, and now granted, you still need infantry in your army to make up a lot of meat, because they have a lot of HP. They can soak the damage. But oftentimes, you know, taking that expensive anti-infantry, you're just asking to get wrecked by, you know, one of those things I just rattled off. Artillery, of course, as well. This really counts as missiles, but Skaven is, again, same thing. Lots of cheap AP units. That low HP pool plus high cost makes them very vulnerable to something like Poisoned Wind Mortars or the Drain effect of the Bell. Yeah, I guess it kind of sounds like I'm bashing on them a lot, but I really do think taking one in specific matchups, like I would say Vampire counts as one, where because the Vampires have to engage you in melee, they don't have any missiles whatsoever. You just have to worry about not getting them, you know, charged by something that'll do a lot of shock damage, or drained out by a Mortis Engine, which you can definitely work around both of those. So this is one matchup I would say definitely. Dwarfs, obviously, as well. Dark Elves, maybe there's an argument there. Chaos, I think, has enough, like, monster and shock power, like Norska, and like the Beastmen, that it makes using Swordmasters against them pretty tough. And I mean, even if they don't bring direct armor piercing, they have great armor sundering tools, as does Norska. Not so true of the Beastmen. But Coast, tons of armor piercing missiles. Tomb Kings, overkill. White Lions can beat Tomb Guard, and they'll actually trade more cost effectively against the constructs as well. So it's kind of the same problem you get with the Lizardmen, more or less. Wood Elves, you don't need anti-infantry armor piercing against for anything. So yeah, there are a handful of specific matchups where you definitely can use them to good effect, and you know, if you kind of plan into it, especially if your opponent doesn't have the right tools to deal with it, which likely they will, but even if they do, you can keep them protected to a good degree, and healing from Alariel and from others can help sustain them through that shock damage if you play your cards right. So yeah, consider Swordmasters, I guess. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. If you do like this sort of content, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. Every time I upload a new video, you'll be notified. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.